Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Bluebeam, Faster Permits, Smarter Projects, How Bluebeam Powers Government Modernization. My name is Parth Tikiwala, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. So we have a few speakers today with us, and let's meet them. You'll find our LinkedIn profiles in the top left window pane. Click through to learn more about our backgrounds and connect with us. We're quite an open bunch and love the subject matter at hand, so let's dive in. I'll start with a quick introduction. Once again, my name is Parth. I'm a public sector leader working at the intersection of technology, data, and policy. And as Acting Director of Technology Modernization and Data for the United States Chief Information Officer in the Executive Office of the President, I've worked to advance initiatives like the Federal Data Strategy, and have held senior roles at the National Archives and Records Administration, and also the United States Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics. I hold degrees from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Michigan State, and I'm also a candidate for my MBA at the University of Chicago, Booth School of Business. But I currently lead public sector and academic programs for the Nemetschek Group and Bluebeam. Outside of work, in the free time that I have, of course, I enjoy spending time with my family and cooking, and also collecting vinyl records. And next up, I have the pleasure of introducing Jalpesh Patel. Jalpesh is a civil engineer with over a decade of experience and currently serves as Industry Development Manager for Infrastructure and Public Sector at Bluebeam. It's part of the Nemetschek Group. He previously worked at firms like WSP and the Harman Group, leading infrastructure projects for both public and private clients. Jalpesh is passionate about digital transformation. He helps teams integrate digital delivery into their workflows. And outside of work, he enjoys traveling and spending time with his family. And it's my distinct pleasure today, of course, last but certainly not least, to have us here on this session, Mr. Daniel Morgan. Daniel Morgan is the first Chief Data Officer of the United States Department of Transportation, having served in the capacity for more than 5 years now. And as CDO, he has overall responsibility for departmental data program and data compliance across the entirety of the United States Department of Transportation. Daniel is responsible for establishing a clear vision of the data managed at DOT and the application of DOT data for decision making. He serves as a data strategist and advisor, steward for improving data quality, liaison for data sharing, and developer of new data products. Mr. Morgan is the longest serving CDO in the federal government. He currently also serves as Acting Associate CIO for Applications and Digital Solutions for the United States Department of Transportation. Prior to assuming the CDO role, Mr. Morgan spent 15 years as a management consultant, providing services to public and private sector clients in a variety of areas. It's important to note that Mr. Morgan is joining this webinar in his personal capacity, and the views expressed and shared by him are his own and do not necessarily attribute to those of the United States Department of Transportation. So with that said, let's transition to the polling and see where the makeup of our session and our audience is from. I see that a clear 50+% is other. We'd like to know if in the peer chat what that other actually is, and let us know. We'd be very curious. But being that we're speaking on the topic of permitting, the topic of how data is tangential to it and integral to it, and also how the call from the United States federal government on modernizing permitting has tectonic effects, I would say, into many sectors. We wanted to kind of highlight a few of them here: energy, transportation, healthcare and education, public works, and administrative. Excuse me. Having said that, I think we have a pretty good spread of persons joining us. So let's go ahead and move through. Our agenda here is going to be quite simple. We want to really have a discussion with my esteemed panelists and guests here today. And while we want to get to that and how permitting actually kind of has that tangential sort of scope between collaboration and our AEC industry, I wanted to just show you our agenda of the day. We wanted to speak to Bluebeam, of course, our Bluebeam public sector practice, and also showcase our sister brand, part of the Nemetschek group as well, called SiteDocs. And with that, we'll go to our White House permitting memo, see how that has had effects and will have a future effect on the United States DOT data, IT, and even cybersecurity posture and beyond. And then we'd like to understand where the connection between all of this is for industry outside of the federal government and inside. And I can't think of anyone better to speak to that subject than Daniel, who's joining us today from US DOT. So with that said, I wanted to just climb in and showcase what Bluebeam Public Sector is all about. We like to think that we are no different than any other vertical that we have at Bluebeam, but we do serve clients that are serving the public. So we have a unique mission in bridging industry and public sector with solutions that drive digital transformation for sustainable impact. Now, if we're reading all of our mission, vision, purpose to transform the public sector, I will just say it very much comes down to a very simple notion. We want to, at Bluebeam, and not only Bluebeam, but Bluebeam Public Sector as a practice, we want to empower those who build and shape our world. And if Bluebeam can be a part of that, Bluebeam Public Sector wants to meet those shaping the world, those building our world, to their mission. So with that said, we want to just lead in, and this isn't a product or a sales pitch at all. I just want to make sure that we can have a good foundation for our discussion today. Bluebeam in itself leads in simplifying digital adoption, empowering professionals to embrace transformation. Now, many of you know or may know Bluebeam as a markup tool, or may know it as a collaborative PDF markup tool that can be used on the field between the planning and design and build and construct phases. But we want to take it a step higher, maybe a step meta, to showcase that Bluebeam can actually make a mark on the built world. It can also adapt to digital transformation and deliver projects successfully. We want to showcase that in the call that, say, governments have, the public sector has, may it be a federal memorandum from the Executive Office of the President on modernizing permitting, or meeting the mission of a particular state Department of Transportation, or showcasing local government or municipality permitting needs, that Bluebeam is there to have and answer the call. So having said that, let's go ahead and see this latest poll number on what's your most used permitting technology tool. We'll get these results a little bit later, but moving on to our sister brand here for SiteDocs. Now, SiteDocs in itself, I would say, is synonymous with safety compliance. If Bluebeam is used for the markup capability and collaboration between, like I said before, the plan and design and build and construct phases, think about the safety integrations that have to happen on and in the site itself and the build environment. We would like to say that SiteDocs is what one should think about. Now, just a couple sentences on SiteDocs as a product. SiteDocs is a cloud-based safety management software that helps companies digitize their safety programs and streamline compliance. We believe that between Bluebeam and SiteDocs, there is a thread that connects not only those two companies and the products and solutions that we offer, but the thread being for this session subject matter, it really is permitting and how we can issue those end-to-end products a little bit more efficiently, a little bit more in a modernized aspect and perspective. That is, in fact, the point of discussion for today. So moving on quickly, SiteDocs itself, similar to Bluebeam, go paperless, reduce your admin burden, and easily manage compliance across all job sites. Again, here in the framing of safety and compliance. And having said that, we can showcase more of SiteDocs for anyone that is interested on this webinar. And we can go ahead and, connect with us and if you have any questions, just please let us know. So if you haven't taken the poll, the most recent polling question, please do so. And then we'll go ahead and move on to the kind of crux of the matter here and maybe showcase what we're here to talk about, which is, of course, the White House's permitting memo. So if you've heard of it or not, I'd like to just move on and get into what we're maybe talking about here. The real idea here between the White House's permitting memo, if there is some sort of an overall, I'll just read the text on the slide here. So background here is on April 15th of this year, the president signed the Updating Permitting Technology for the 21st Century Memorandum, which affirms the need for digital permitting, mandates interagency workflow modernization, and links funding to tech adoption. So I want to bring in our panel here in Jalpesh Patel and Daniel Morgan as we kind of go into what this permitting aspect means. Framing it on a high level from an external private sector perspective, we see the memo as an opportunity for permitting reform and a new governance priority for the public sector within. We see opportunities in the government as a whole, as an enterprise, maybe having a greater chance in governing and in data governance and data interoperability, a greater chance at making it more efficient, a call for agencies to do that. Maybe performance is public and timelines are now a policy deliverable. Maybe there's a mandate that we can actually speak to. And also, can this permitting memo be a test bed for different initiatives and different strategies, namely the federal data strategy that was initiated for the first time in January of 2020. So before we dive into the public sector angle, Jalpesh, would you like to add a little bit more detail from your industry development perspective on the White House's permitting memo?
Yeah, Parth, thanks for letting me in. I think this is the right timing when it comes to digitalization of permitting. A lot of digitalization has been happening down the stream, as you could see. We have a lot of the funding coming from the infrastructure bill, where we're advocating for ADCMS grants, where we're using technology for design, we're using technology of tracking projects. But when it comes to getting to that point, in terms of completing the design and getting it to construction, there's a big delay. And I think that's what this focus is on. Can we streamline that process? Can we deliver on time? Can we have a sense of the timeline in terms of what that looks like? And having the transparency and the capabilities available through the digital tools available to execute on it, I think it's going to be a big player there. I mean, the main component here is cost. When the bill came out, we had all this funding allocated according to the cost analysis that took place back in 2021. Now, fast forward 2025, cost of construction has doubled. And in doing so, majority of these projects take at least 2 years of permitting review at the federal level. can we streamline that process, speed it up? It's going to actually make our money work faster. And I think that's what I'm excited about, to learn more about what that perspective is from the US DOT. So I look forward to that. So I guess I'll pass it on to Daniel to get his insight.
Perfect.
Sure. I mean, I think, this is an example of, I think, a pretty aspirational policy that really is attempting to mark out a more efficient process that is technology enabled, right? And so the path to get there is not always straightforward. And I'm happy to share some stories of some other times that the government has done some of this along the way to sort of share some lessons learned. But I think we can all agree that while technology can enable this process, technology is not the thing that is not the only prescription for closing the timeline between design and construction, right? So we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of all of the business process reforms that we possibly can as well. And I think also starting to address just some basic things about, when we think about digitalizing something, we need not think about an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper on our screen, right? That's just a way to render information. It's not the actual way that we're conveying the information. And when we start to think about how we can convey the information so that it can be displayed on our computer as a PDF or in a website where people are trying to engage with information about the project, or digitally as resource management agencies are trying to understand the impacts and mitigations that are proposed as part of a project. All of those multiple uses of the same data standards are things that we can start to think about, and there will be competition amongst those parties for what the right data standard should be, and that's okay. But we will learn along the way, and I think there's a lot of opportunity here as well to really think through the different kinds of uses. There's a great example in transit, if we've got time to go through it, Parth.
Absolutely. But before we get into specific examples, I think you noted something that I would say is quintessential CDO, Mr. Morgan Gold. Okay, the idea, if there is a better phrase, let me know. The idea here is not just, and I think we'd be doing this entire conversation, this entire call for action, if you will, this idea of digitalization between formats of paper-based to digital. I think from at least our public sector understanding from the outside and from where we sit, Jalpesh and I, we think that with our conversations is a central thing that we are trying to solve for. We get that time in and time again. Oh, your product or your offering will do this. Oh, this White House permitting memo is actually trying to just connect those two dots, right? And it's incumbent upon us, not only in this conversation, but overall in this collective conversation, to showcase that is barely the starting point. The point is actually understanding where, once we have the data, how that actually can modernize the other processing that we have, how it can actually be governed and managed across time, and how it can it can have that interoperability, across not only agents, but how it can actually meet those individual missions across different federal agencies. Am I getting to that right bubble here?
I think so. And I think really understanding sort of the different uses is kind of key, right? Standards don't exist just to make systems talk to each other. Those systems exist to, work on a fundamental business purpose. So being able to knit this stuff together and really in support of what decision or phase of the process is kind of the core question, right? Right. But, if we don't view this thing as a way, the PDF is a way to encode that information, not necessarily the only way to deliver it, is really the key, right?
Exactly.
Correct. And to add, I mean, a famous image that comes to mind is I think Deloitte had created where the advancements that most governments are making towards digitalization, and it has broken it down to just paper-based, then mimicking paper-based in a digital format. And I think that's where majority of the world is at. But actually getting to doing digital is what I think, Daniel, you're getting to, is where the process itself has to get away from a physical paper. You got to think of it from a different perspective, data by itself. And then eventually, if you just had data by itself, regardless of the format, how can that be structured and be accessible down the road? Because if you want to deliver on time, it's all going to be about how you're generating data and the accessibility of the data, regardless of the platform. It's going to be a multi-platform future. And what does that look like?
Absolutely. I think, I worked for a CIO in my time here at the Department of Transportation. We were talking about some of our early digital transformation efforts, and we were tinkering with some different ways to pursue automation. And she said, the purpose of this work is not to do a dumb thing faster. And I think we're not here to accelerate a process that doesn't work, right? We're here to make a process work better, or to throw away that process and reimagine it now that we are able to work with the information in a new and smarter way, right? And connect that process to other processes, because as you've pointed out, this is part of the whole sort of digital construction life cycle, right? We're talking about one piece of it, and setting it in context matters, because if you've got your project digitally designed, then you can do the digital analysis and you can preserve all of the data from that and take it through into the construction phase. But then the next one of these that comes around, you are preserving all of that effect analysis, and you can do cumulative effects much more easily than if you would have to reconstruct years and years of studies.
And I just want to press that point a little bit more. Understanding from the executive level, like yourself and the CIO, for those basic foundational attributes, I want to call them, it is critical for at least our side in the private sector to connect to those things. I think that we have to be at cause as a software company, as the livelihood of having and meeting and selling a solution or an offering, to understand at a fundamental level where an unmet need can be met. And it's on my side of the coin this time, Daniel, that I can say solutions that are collaborative, that can actually integrate data across the life cycle in and around meeting those needs like you've described, is where I believe Bluebeam can be highlighted, where SiteDocs can be highlighted. But I digress, because this isn't that kind of conversation. I would remiss, however, to not talk about, and this is, I think, more to Jalpesh's side. I talk to him daily about this notion of how data in itself is alive everywhere. Daniel, we know this, right? I mean, I think we all are beginning to understand that the impacts, generally speaking, are all there for how data can and has and continues to every nanosecond impact us. But how much of it can be captured in that mission-oriented way across the public sector, and in the framing of infrastructure, and how critical it is for leveraging strategic decision-making when we talk about not only our product side of things, our meeting product to the federal public sector mission part of things, but the overall building and shaping of things. So, Jalpesh, would you like to just extend that almost abstract point into what you see in the industry development perspective?
Yeah. In terms of what I'm hearing a lot is exactly what you're saying, right? In terms of how does the data interflow with each other? It's an issue that's been ongoing for a while. We're trying to tackle it. I think right now is the perfect time. There's a focus point on it, and it's not like we're trying to take a big chunk at the whole process. We're just looking at a single process that makes the biggest impact currently on majority of the projects in terms of timeline. And which is why this has been focused, even though it's generic technology, but then they have directed the focus with environmental review, because historically, that's the process that takes the longest time. A great example here is from my time at Allplan. We were doing a pilot with DelDOT, and we were able to design the whole structure. It was almost, I think, a 7-span bridge, and they were going to replace it. And they were able to do the structural analysis, the lane assessments, and all of that within a 6-month period, where after 6 months, it went into the federal review process before it could be constructed. We were waiting, originally the timeline was a year, but that eventually ended up being 2 years. And then before we can go ahead and construct the project, we had to go back and reevaluate our design according to new standards and norms in place. And that kind of just extends that life cycle over and over again. And we're talking about a small project. When you look at these mega projects, that compounds over time and then just slows us down, which is why we have a major problem in the US, where if you look at 50+% of our infrastructure is beyond its life expectancy. And for us to catch up to that, I think that's where this push is coming for, where the focus is going to be on delivery. Can we stay on timeline? Can we standardize this process? And now that we have the technology available in today's world, how best can we utilize it, because of the processes are outdated? And hopefully we could focus in on that and learn more about it in terms of how it's relevant and how we could take a part in it.
I agree. And this actually sets us up for something that I've been wanting to talk to in a public recorded setting with Daniel for a minute now, since I've stepped into this private sector side of things. While data is fundamental in understanding what our decisions should or can be strategically, and I think that this White House permitting memo undergirds that idea, and then steps up actionable calls for modernizing X, Y, and Z in the actual permitting regulation ecosystem. I'll be remiss not to talk about the federal data strategy. While Daniel is the current chief data officer, I will also say that he was the first vice chair of the Federal Executive Chief Data Officer Council, which was tasked in all-encompassing federal data strategy for the entire enterprise, and where and how data can be a driver for strategic decision-making. Daniel, can you please speak to the FDS and how that could have or can still, for CDOs, for CIOs in the public sector, connect to the call for action that the White House permitting memo is actually giving us here?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that is really unique about the environmental review and permitting process, more so than maybe other parts of the government, and what I love about working in transportation, is how interdisciplinary it is and how much it has to pull from other sectors, right? So, a lot of people think that here at the U.S. Department of Transportation, I'm only concerned with traffic data and data about roads and things that we've built. And I have to remind them that, no, we actually care about the soil that's built on, and the weather fluxes that go over that stuff and how it drains and all these other kinds of things.
Right.
And because of that, I think groups like environment and transportation and parks and other kinds of physical infrastructure folks are naturally biased toward sharing, right? They have to get their work done. But we don't always understand each other in terms of what questions that we're trying to answer, right? Or what our role is at given stages of a data set's journey through our different areas of responsibility in environmental review. So one of the things that the federal data strategy encourages us to do is not just focus on data for data's sake, but to focus on the questions that we're trying to answer and making sure that we are applying data throughout all of those questions. That means that we have to borrow from not just data acumen, but also what we know about digital acumen, understanding the journey of a project, right? Understanding the moments that matter for a project sponsor to be able to get from idea to design, from design to construction, and from construction to actually delivered facility, right? Understanding the role of all those steps, as well as the role of data across them, then shows you where you need to share data, helps you manage data with a long view, which is another key component of the federal data strategy. We are not transacting here, right? We are updating our understanding of the built environment or the natural environment that we're working in by using this data and proposing to do a project in it. And because that understanding needs to be maintained over time, and decisions will be made in the future on top of decisions that we already made, we have to be able to use standards that allow us to interoperate across a longer period of time, right? This isn't some just regular old digital transaction that happens every quarter, right? This stuff lives in the natural world for a super long time. And so we are not necessarily doing a great job of stewarding our long-term understanding of the environment with the way that we produce these environmental review documents and these permitting decisions today, right? And we know that because of how hard it is to just extract basic information from those things as it stands. The federal data strategy gives us a lot of breadcrumbs that we can apply as we try to implement this memo, right? To make sure that we're really building something that endures, not just something that complies.
Well said on that. That analogy of breadcrumbs in itself is quite relevant in this conversation because while there are directional things that can be said in executive guidance such as this or at the agency level, it's a whole different thing on how it actually can be distilled at that agency level and how it can actually have an impact. So with that said, I think that permitting is involved at the DOT in some fashion, maybe at the state level itself. Jokes aside, I think that the idea of openness in this process itself and digitalizing that process, undergirded by what you're talking about on the fundamentals of what the federal data strategy has done previously and what this permitting memo actually calls for. Can you speak to the actual impact that you believe a call for action like this memo could showcase from your perspective? And of course, not going into one pathway or another, that the call really here is all-encompassing, and then that kind of all-encompassing kind of organizational chart. If I'm seeing it, it's a downward V, right? And then it goes across the entirety of the enterprise that we call the US DOT.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand DOT's role in the environmental review and permitting process. We're not generally the ones that are sponsoring a project. Usually that's our state and local partners, right? So they're the ones that are building the plans and engaging the contractors to do those things. And we're not actually the permitting issuance authority either. What we are doing is shepherding the process, helping people prepare their documents, making sure they understand the rules and regulations when they need a federal permit and those kinds of things. So I think what we get to do is sort of lead by example, right? And encourage people to do these kinds of things. Like I see a comment in the Q&A about, being able to get data out of a PDF and put it into something that's a little bit more useful so that we could do AI with it, right? That the permitting action plan, if you follow what's in here and what the permitting memo asks for, that sets the substrate to be able to do the things that we just talked about. But that requires everybody in the ecosystem to be brave and break out of the, let's go ahead and submit a PDF for this, right? So the PDF is necessary but insufficient to achieve the goals of the permitting memo and to achieve our own goals about liberating the data that's encoded in that PDF for use, like being able to conduct artificial intelligence analysis against it, or to aggregate a cadastre over time of the cumulative effects of design proposals through an area and what the decisions around that might have been, right? For us to be able to reimagine the way this stuff works, right? And how the decisions get made, right? We have to break out of the paper in the first place. And so, we will then discover things that we never discovered. And this is probably like a good idea, a good place for the transit analogy, if you want it, Parth, but I don't want to like suck all the air out of the room.
If anything, you're putting air into the room. It's the reverse. I will say, Daniel, very critical nugget, golden nugget here. Another one that you just gave here is that PDFs themselves will be sufficient to get that step of modernization out. And tools that can actually help speed up and modernize that processing will be key. And being that this is a Bluebeam a webinar, or at least a session on speaking to that, I'll be remiss not to mention that that is something that our offering actually elevates itself and prides itself on. But again, I don't want to get into that conversation. I will say this, though. Would you say that these different agency plans, maybe DOT, state, DHS, USDA, Interior, we can go down to all the CFO Act agencies if you'd like, but the fundamentals of what the permitting memo is actually asking for, this idea of lens correction for what digitalization can mean in the permitting ecosystem, that hasn't changed and will not change across agencies. Am I correct on that?
I think you're right. Yeah, there's like a fundamental core here of everybody's going to have to do something. And I think part of the conversation, DOT is going to have to do stuff, but the place that really needs to move is the resource management agency side of the house, right? The place that needs to be able to receive the data in the new formats and act on the data in the new formats are the Army Corps, the Fish and Wildlife, the BLM folks of the world, right? Who are processing this information, rendering their decisions about permits and so on and so forth. Like those are the folks. That's where the lever of transformation is. It requires a project sponsor to be brave too, but all of those agencies are grabbing the same brass ring, right? Over like in terms of what the standard that the permitting memo has set.
Perfect. And while we say resource management agencies and while we say project sponsors, someone who's had, obviously, Daniel, it's an everyday occurrence for you to manage the, I'd say, 7,001 projects that you have on your plate.
Just a few.
But I'd like to ask, Jalpesh's perspective on this. The idea that you've seen in industry, Jalpesh, of connecting that one project sponsor in that one industry, let it be infrastructure for this context. Do you see that kind of connection being made between, say, yourself in your role with the project sponsor and then serving the greater public
For
sector?
sure. And I just want to go back to what Daniel had mentioned, right? The future does not revolve around PDF, right? We need to kind of get around it. And Bluebeam understands that even though majority of our success was through the transition from paper to PDF, and then we brought everyone along for the ride. I mean, right now, 47 of the 50 DOTs utilize Bluebeam for their digital processes. And that was with the success of Federal Highways Everyday Counts program. And we played a crucial role there. But now we're looking at it from the data perspective and what does that feature look like down the road, which is why we have acquisitions like SiteDocs and GoCanvas, where we're focusing on the data and the different types of data structure outside of a paper-based workflow. And in doing so, I think that's our say in terms of what we think the future looks like. And we're ramping up our production in terms of producing a platform which can cater to that. And those are the conversations we're starting to have with a lot of those state and local agencies in terms of, okay, you made that first step with us. You trusted us in that process in terms of how we delivered. And we clearly see the success with 90% of the state agencies utilizing our product. Now for the next journey, what does that look like? And now we have the support of SiteDocs and GoCanvas in doing so. And it kind of aligns with a lot of things that you have mentioned and Daniel has mentioned in terms of focusing on the accessibility of the information at the right time to make that call. And in this journey, I think we need to iterate quicker. And in doing so, this memo plays a key role where we're going to start exploring these processes. The federal agencies and the White House actually wants you to go and try things, fail fast, and figure out ways of navigating this effort in terms of what that future might look like. And that's a lot of the conversations I'm having with the state agencies, where majority of the agencies are just piloting it currently and figuring out what the needs are, because we haven't looked at this whole approach from this perspective. It's a new way of working, and we're still basically going through iterations and exploring to better understand what is relevant, what is not relevant, and how does that connect the dots across the overall life cycle of a project or an asset.
And that's absolutely critical to actually understanding the breadth and depth of the call for action here from the Executive Office of the President for this entirety of not only the data ecosystem, not only the permitting ecosystem to be modernized in and be governed better and managed better and all those things that we've been talking about, but actually also the architecture, engineering, construction industry as it affects us all and empowers us, I hope, to shape and build the world that's around us. I wanted to transition to some of our final slides here as we close out this conversation. But before we get into those two final kind of slides, I want to encourage everyone listening to actually ask questions. Please put in your questions in the live Q&A pane, and we can actually try to address those after our conversation here has kind of transitioned to that Q&A period. I wanted to just deliberately put in the White House's permitting memo and its key takeaways towards the end of our discussion, because it's not just about highlighting where a digital software solution in the construction technology space can be of help. I think Jalpesh would agree with me on that, while being a team member of mine in our public sector practice. But I think it's also quite relevant to showcase just that point to public servants and public executives like Daniel that's on the call right now. The mandate is very clear on permitting modernization from the directions on the words on the sheets of the paper that have been endorsed by the president. While it calls for a faster, more digital, adaptable permitting ecosystem, I think that what we're trying to highlight here is from a DOT perspective, that it just isn't a one path kind of way of moving forward, that the entirety of what was there before actually has to adapt as well. I think, Daniel, you made the point earlier that adaptability, this kind of agileness in the call for action, and then mixing in the urgency of a whole of agency showcase, a whole of government visibility on this is going to be critical for not only individual agency permitting plans to succeed, but the call for action, let's just be honest, to be met. And then I don't know if you have takeaways or maybe final takeaways on this perspective from what we've been talking about.
I think just an instructive story, to sort of, I think, tie some of this stuff together. Today, you can open up the Maps application on your mobile phone and get directions on transit. And that didn't exist for a very long time until Portland TriMet decided that they wanted to help their customers use transit. There was no data standard for how to describe transit directions. There was no data standard that was broadly adopted across industry to be able to do it. And so they partnered with, at the time, Google to figure out how to get the transit directions on the Google Maps app. They figured that out, and now they built an open trip planner. So there's a whole open source trip planning methodology that's associated with it. But what we found after we had this way to express transit in a geospatial way that helped people with wayfinding is that it had so many other purposes. It helps us understand how people can access jobs and opportunities and all these other kinds of things. You can do a lot of additional analysis by merging it with census. You can use it as the basis of forecasts for how your infrastructure project is going to work in the first place. And the digital design of your transit system very much dovetails nicely with what we're talking about here, right? So how do designs and permits impact your ridership projections, among other things, right? You can start to use that digital expression in many different ways. We will discover new and varied applications of the data that we're talking about here as we go through this journey of adopting the data standards and the practices that are outlined in this memo. But the possibilities are really limitless. They do not all come from government. But because there was a simple specification that was broadly adopted and got a lot of eyeballs on it, a revolution happened in terms of wayfinding and the ability to be able to access the amenities that we are all trying to build for folks, right? So that I think is the opportunity that's before us if we really truly embrace the opportunity to make permitting and environmental review a digitally transformed process.
Well, I'm glad that you said that because we haven't really seen the slides beforehand. So, surprise, Daniel. I believe Bluebeam can streamline these three urgent memo takeaways and meet the missions of the federal agencies, but also, as I'm seeing these discussions being had, that while it's very typical of solutions not just centered on construction technology, but those that indicate some process of this or that for a policy or memoranda to meet the need and showcase the actual support for the entire need. I want to just lobby for 1 second and say, because I head the government and academic affairs practices for Bluebeam, that we have fundamentally made it our mission to meet the missions of those in the public sector. Having said that, it's not anything dissimilar from meeting the federal government's need and how Bluebeam can actually streamline, how Bluebeam can actually support, how Bluebeam can and does make it more active and collaborative for these kinds of things, not only for the modernizing of the permitting posture that we have for the federal government, but how it can trickle down into state and local and municipality levels. Now, we already support, like JP mentioned, state DOTs, 94% of all state DOTs, and also hundreds upon hundreds of local government entities. We're talking about cities and municipalities here, but we want to do more. We want to understand the actual needs of those in local government, of those at state governments, not only at State Department of Transportation. And of course, while I have a soft spot for federal agencies that I used to work with readily, yes, Daniel, US DOT is among them, but it's also meeting the federal need as it encompasses this entire subject matter. I believe that we're in a moment that has not been presented to ourselves, at least in the federal ecosystem and the data and IT ecosystem with this permitting memo. But we also have things that we've done in the past that are readily available as use cases and as guidance, or as Daniel said, breadcrumbs that have been laid out to a greater, more digitalized world, a world that can be transformed with data underneath it, and a data for purpose that can be used for better strategic decision making with the utilization of artificial intelligence, and most importantly, used in a capacity that, at least in my lens from Bluebeam and from Jalpesh's lens from different sectors such as infrastructure and other industry development sectors that we're looking into, it actually helps better serve and build and shape the world that we all live in. So having said that, we have the remainder of the time with questions that are actually coming in. So with that said, I want to just, this is a free for all for the ones here. As they're coming in, let me just, hand it over to Jalpesh for his closing thoughts, and then we'll dive into some questions. Thank you.
Parth, I think you did pretty well in terms of summarizing it. I know we're down to 5 minutes. If we want, we could go right to the questions.
Perfect. So having said that, let me kind of go into the questions themselves. And I'm just going to pick the first one I see. All right. So we have a participant that says, so I have Bluebeam. How outside of plans and permitting applications, PDFs, and scripting stamps on approvals, how can we go further, especially as we are transitioning from access databases to GIS permitting solutions? Jalpesh, I think you wrote this question. No, I'm kidding. This is right for you and for your perspective, please.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a misperception of Bluebeam as just being a document solution. There's a whole lot to it. You could do a lot of intelligence behind the scenes. Someone had a question about AI and how do they utilize AI within Bluebeam. And we've been doing this for about 10 years with computer vision, where we could overlay plan sets and find discrepancies and highlight them automatically. Similarly, our PDFs are not just plain old PDFs, they're fairly intelligent. So we kind of understand the context of what is on the PDF. We can run OCR on top of it and understand the text that's on top of it, and then generate that into a database that could be mined through AI technologies. And that's some of the things that you will be introduced to if you were to come to Unbound, where the next phase of our Bluebeam growth will be through AI. So it will be worthwhile if you're in town to stop by and see some of the innovations that we're doing through AI and data within Bluebeam outside of just plain plan sets and document management.
Jalpesh, thank you. And I will reiterate another point here. While this is a public sector federal government question, and I'll read it in its entirety, in the government sector, it's critical that we can get support from Bluebeam to handle CUI, which is controlled unclassified information, such as UCNI and OUO, possible even into classified documents. Currently, Bluebeam does not meet federal security requirements for use of Bluebeam Cloud sessions and projects. To allow efficient project execution in the government sector, we hope to partner with Bluebeam to make a pathway forward. And to that participant, I will unequivocally say that we look forward to working with you as well. we are at Bluebeam and Bluebeam Public Sector in particular, with his info security teams, actively working to get and make that pathway forward. And with that said, I will say that our premier conference this fall will actually be taking place in Washington, D.C., just like Jalpesh mentioned. And it is called Unbound. And it is going to be taking place September 30th through October 2nd. You can visit unbound.bluebeam.com for more details. And please reach out to Jalpesh or myself for special discounts for those that are public servants at any level of government, or if you're in the academic ecosystem, and we can give you special rates and special opportunities to engage specifically in the public sector and academic framing. But it is Unbound this September 30th through October 2nd for all that is the next chapter for Bluebeam. White House permitting memo included. For having said that, I will just, I guess, note that this was a special opportunity for Jalpesh and myself and the entire public sector practice here at Bluebeam to have Daniel as the expert and chief data officer of the United States DOT is an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your insights, Daniel. And you will find a recording of this for those who have registered, be distributed in a short while here. And if there are any questions at all, or anything that you may want to engage in a constructive conversation about the issues, about what the pulse of the federal, state, or government U.S. posture actually is, and how that connects to the AC industry, academics, and or Bluebeam, or all of the above, please give us an email. Contact us, JP or myself, or email us directly at publicsector@bluebeam.com. Thank you again for your time, for your support, and also for your interest in joining today's session on the impacts of the White House's permitting memo across the federal ecosystem.